In this week's episode, the boys continue with their AB-506 review, minus the half-hour definition review. Here we go. Scott, I don't know how exciting that last episode was, but I hope our listeners enjoyed it.
I had fun with it. So what are we going to do with this one? Jump right in with definitions?
Yeah, oh man. Geez, I think I was falling asleep during that, but hopefully it provided some level of value. I don't know.
Well, I think it's a good takeaway for any kind of new document, new reference standard, whatever it is. First thing you should do is probably read the definitions, and you're probably familiar with most of them, but there may be some, like owner-user, I think was a great example from part one of this. Know what that means and what they're referring to. So when they keep repeating it throughout the document, you know what they're alluding to.
I can't argue with that logic. All right, should we jump right in where we left off, and that's inspection intervals?
Yeah, I guess so. We kind of wrapped up the installation, kind of externals, equipment file, rolling into that stuff. So I guess following along with the flow of the document, the grades would be the next thing. 1, 2, or 3. There you go. What else do you need to know about that?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. If you got a cap, you can jump to grade 3 if you want. Just let her buck, right? So section 11 starts out with a little blurb here. And actually one thing we kind of chuckled about before was how AB-506 was kind of written with the guidance and premise of owner users, but they also use the API codes and stuff like that. And right off the bat in the inspection intervals, the first thing it kind of says is the requirements covered in AB-506 and the applicable information from API 510, 572, 570, 574, and the National Board Inspection Code shall be used to determine the appropriate inspection intervals for boilers, pressure vessels, piping, and pressure relief valves, even though they previously mentioned that these documents are only to be referenced, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, don't forget, those are not in force. So you can't follow them.
So that's kind of a little bit of the irony of it. But like they say, they're probably the go-to documents to kind of set your intervals off of. But it's going to be also user experience and stuff like that, and knowledge of the process and your actual damage mechanisms.
Yeah, and really those are great documents for, let's say, starting points. So if you're, let's say, a new, smaller facility that doesn't really have much in place as far as integrity management programs, that's kind of your ground level. That's a good place to start. See what they have to offer, and you just build on it from there.
No, totally.
Or you bring in an inspection company and they do it for you.
Yeah, they'll read those documents for you and then implement them.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the inspection intervals in 506 are a progressive interval grading system, according to them, and it's used to determine the maximum safe interval that can be assigned based on the results from successful, thorough inspections, right? And that's going to be from your internal inspections.
Yeah, internal or on stream, but yeah, typically internal, right?
Yeah.
That's the best way.
Well, your on stream is technically considered a thorough, like internal inspection if you can't get inside of it. And don't conflate what I just said with like keep it shut and just do on stream inspections with everything.
Yeah,
but
you don't want to do that for the life of it.
No. So items have to be inspected by a certain due date as per this document, unless you have a authorized risk-based inspection program within your CAP. So what they've done to kind of guide our owner users or our owners to run their integrity management systems or integrity management programs is provide a grading system. So if you're new to the game and you don't know too much, they have a grade 1. If you have a little bit of experience with the equipment and you kind of are starting to understand the damage mechanisms and the ebbs and flow of the process and where things can kind of get you off guard regarding integrity management issues, you can move to a grade 2 if you understand what you're doing. And then once you have your cap, and the appropriate systems and people in place, you can move to your grade 3 and or with that cap have an RBI program and extend it out a little bit farther. Scott, fair assessment of that?
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to look at it. Also think about how new the equipment is on that same point too. So the grade 1 is typically the initial, so like the first time you're going to go into that thing. So you have, and there's ways around this, and it doesn't always have to be this way, but let's just take it like this first of all, and then we'll maybe dive into it a little deeper. So your grade 1, that's going to be your initial. So that is the first time you go into anything, typically on a 1-year interval. And basically what you're doing there is validating that all your designs worked out, all the mechanisms that you're expecting are there or aren't there. Just validating the whole process, right? Moving on to the grade 2 or the extended thorough, they may refer to it as, that is kind of after you've already done your initials, you've went into this thing once. So this is going to be like the second, third, fourth, whatever it is. Next time you're going into this. And like Frank alluded to already, if you're a non-owner user, you're just an owner, this is as far as you can go with this. So if you go to your table 1 in the back of the book there, grade 2, that's it. You can't stretch your intervals any farther than that. Now, if you are one of those owners that's also an owner user, then now you have the option to extend out to grade 3, and that'll give you basically just a longer interval that you can go in between inspecting these things. And then again, the RBI is another thing kind of above and beyond that, but again, that's got to be something you have as part of your cap, and then you can go quite long with some of these things. But I think we'll save the RBI deep dive for a little bit later in the episode here. It comes up towards the back of the document, but yeah, that's kind of a way to look at it. It's how experienced the company is one way to take it, and then also the life of the equipment. Is it new? Is it the first time you're going in? Do you have any history on this? Are you confident in what you're inspecting? Now, is it a replacement in kind? That's a little different going into it for the first time versus, say, a brand new piece of equipment in a new facility where you have a good idea what to expect, but you really haven't proven anything yet.
Yeah, just some highlights I've taken out from 506 under the grade 1, just like we alluded to. An inspection conducted at the grade 1 interval is intended to provide confirmation that the inspection plans and strategies are appropriate, and to identify any deficiencies in the design or construction that may be revealed during the initial operation. So they want you to try and work out all the kinks during these short intervals where you're not letting it run long enough, or the owner is not, denying the fact that things might go wrong and saying, you know what, let's just push it till failure. They want you to recognize what's happening or if anything needs to be fixed before anything bad can happen. Another thing that I have here is an owner user or an integrity assessment organization acting on behalf of the owner must provide records to ABSA to confirm that the actual inspection interval they have assigned, as well as the current status of the equipment. And this kind of stuff is normally provided on the ESR. So they want you to go in, they want you to document the inspection, obviously, and then they want that turned over to them to prove that it's actually been done. So it is auditable, I guess.
Yeah, and I think to button that all up together, you're gonna have your equipment installed, installation inspections done, all that. You have a plan in place, and 1 year goes by, you go in and inspect it. So you're just continually building on that equipment file now. So now you're going to have your first thorough, internal, whatever it is you've done. You're going to have an inspection report on that, certified by the appropriate people. That's going to go into the equipment file, whether that's a digital file integrated with your IMS program, hard copies, whatever it is you have. That's going to live in that equipment file. You're going to update your ESR. ABSA is going to receive that at the end of the year or quarterly, whatever agreement you have with them. And then, like Frank said, if they want to come in and audit that and see that basically back up what your ESR is saying. Okay, let me see the equipment file for this piece of equipment. They're going to want to see those inspection reports in there. So you just want to have those things available. If you don't want to make it too much of an Easter egg hunt, or else it just won't end well for you, right? That's not the way to start out an audit.
No, and they'll keep you stuck at grade 1.
Well, yeah, sure. There's a potential for that, or if it's going to be hard to get a cap or to keep one, or depending on what level you're at with that.
Yeah. So a couple highlights I have under grade 2 is a thorough inspection interval up to the maximum interval shown at grade 2 may be assigned if the item has successfully concluded a period of service at the grade 1 and a thorough inspection has proven that the interval can be safely increased to grade 2. So maybe one thing we should have kind of mentioned is that Appendix A is essentially a table of the inspection and servicing intervals for equipment and PSVs. So they have actually a fairly comprehensive breakdown of equipment. It goes under boilers, heating boilers, pressure vessels. I feel like I should know this offhand, but I got to turn the page. Upstream vessels, and within those they have a bunch of other different breakdowns underneath, and they have interval grades ranging from 1 year for your boilers, and then starting at 5 years for air receivers or dryers or hot water tanks and stuff like that. So they actually give pretty fair intervals at grade 1, right, for new sites or new companies starting out. Like, they don't want to just take you out at the knees and say you have to inspect everything every year. Like, they have fairly decent intervals that give you a chance to build a robust inspection plan and stuff like that, and also execute it during that time frame for when you have to go in and perform your thorough inspection.
Well, and that's when something's going to happen too, right? Whether it's a fabrication error, design error, something you didn't account for, it's going to be sooner than later. So that's kind of the intent of that grade 1. And, just looking at the table, depending on the piece of equipment, it's going to be a 1 year up to a 5 year. And that's just based on like industry experience, kind of feedback, historical data, what things have had catastrophic failure, what things typically don't. That's kind of where that gets weighed in, why some things have such a short interval versus other types of equipment. What kind of damage, destruction will this cause? That all those things are kind of weighed in. So that's where it's come from. But yeah, I guess as we're going through these grades, that's where you would reference. So if you decided you're on a grade 1, 2, or 3, and you know what piece of equipment you have, you'd go to that Appendix A, scroll down to the equipment you're looking for, and just look under the appropriate grade. So it's going to have a grade for the equipment itself, and then it's going to have a max interval based on the grading system as well for the applicable PSV or whatever kind of overpressure protection you have there as well. So two separate things, but just two different columns, right? One for the equipment, one for the PSV.
Yeah. So grade 3, it's technically classified as an extended thorough inspection interval, and it says owner users only, right? And this is where that verbiage comes in. An owner user may extend the thorough inspection interval up to a maximum interval shown in the grade 3 if the item has successfully concluded a period of service at grade 1 and a thorough inspection has proven that the interval can be safely increased to grade 3. So you can technically jump from a grade 1 to a grade 3 with a cap.
If you have a cap, sure, yeah. Is that the paragraph we were going back and forth on the other week? And it was like the owner user verbiage that totally changes the understanding of that. Is that the one?
No, that one's coming up. That's actually vessels in known service.
Yeah, that one, whenever we get to that, that's a great example of why we wasted so much time on the definitions. It's really good to understand, and owner versus owner user, that's an easy thing to interchange to which you shouldn't.
So
anyways, where were we on there? Grade 3, you got to have a cap, right?
Right.
It's a big thing with the grade 3.
And within your cap, as we mentioned before, you can have a risk-based inspection program which can extend these beyond the grade 3 intervals listed on this chart. But your RBI program has to be approved by ABSA, and you have to be certified to have one, I guess.
Yeah, it would be listed on your cap. You could think of it as like a grade 4 almost, if you will. It's like
Grade 4.
another extension out, if you will, beyond the table. It's not really limited other than, I believe it's 10 years. You can't go beyond without a thorough assessment of your RBI. So you'll see these things kicked out like 50 years and like these really long intervals. That's probably fine. You just got to make sure that you're doing those thorough assessments, reevaluating that RBI, make sure it's still valid for that extended period of time. And yet that has to be documented too. That's all stuff that can be audited as well. So the same way as like doing a thorough inspection, you got to have proof to back that up that, okay, we are doing these reassessments every 10 years. We're not just putting 50 years on it and see what it looks like in 50 years. It's not quite that easy.
No, and you'll follow up with that with, on-stream inspections like UT and stuff like that, right? So you can still prove it. So the next paragraph here is 11.2, which follows up with that, is the review of inspection requirements. And this is something that a lot of owner users don't like doing, or even people in the grade 1 and 2 section. The owner must conduct an appropriate assessment to validate the inspection requirements and allocate equipment to a lower grade interval as required. So sometimes, you might get that first jump at the grade 1 or grade 2 and extend it out to 5 or 6 years, whatever it is. But then you have a couple process upsets or something changes within your process or within the plant, the way it operates. You might need to kick it back to a lower interval grade, or rein in that interval until you can establish a new corrosion rate and exactly what's happening to that pressure equipment, and act accordingly. I guess that's what this section is saying.
Yeah, and maybe you go in there and find something you weren't expecting in your initial inspection plan. That kind of goes back to the idea of the grade 1 and kind of testing all these things right away. But that could be something where you go from a 1 to a 3 and get ahead of yourself a little bit and find something in there, some sort of mechanism you weren't kind of expecting, and now your remaining life is quite reduced. So you might want to actually reduce your interval at that point until you can really get a handle on what's going on there.
Yeah, and some of the changes might include like a pressure or temperature change. Something that I never really thought about, and I am reading this out of the document, is throughput. You might increase throughput and put additional stresses on that piece of equipment.
Sure.
Additional loading and susceptibility to corrosion, stress corrosion, or even fatigue and creep. So, those are all things to consider that might have not initially been considered, as your experience with this equipment grows. That's why it's a grading system, where it gives you the time and the opportunity to assess all these little things.
Yeah, and also don't forget, like these great reference documents, they continually get updated. New damage mechanisms get added sometimes. New kind of inspection methodologies get added to the RBI programs, which kind of forces you to redo some things. Might inherently have you reduce some of your intervals. It's an ever-changing world, right? So just be cautious of that, especially those things that get kicked out at really long intervals. I think that's the importance of having the reassessment, because your RBI program is going to be ever-changing too and evolving over the years. Yeah.
So this is the section, Scott, where we kind of started having a conversation. There's 11.3. It's vessels in known service. So I'm going to read this right out of here. Exceptions to the normal grading procedures may be applied in cases where the pressure vessels will perform the same duty as that of an existing vessel under similar operating conditions. The pressure equipment is substantially the same as an existing item regarding geometry, design, construction, and the conditions of service. And there is sufficient and relevant inspection history to allow for similar service comparison. In such cases, the equipment may be given the same grade up to a maximum of grade 2 as the item to which it is being compared. Okay? Notwithstanding the above, an owner user who has the appropriate organization, structure, and the required in-house engineering, corrosion, inspection, and other resources, as well as documented risk analysis processes, may establish a maximum interval up to that listed for grade 3.
Yeah, that second part's where it gets good.
Yeah.
And it's that word owner user that changes that whole thing.
It is.
If you kind of interchange that owner user for owner, it kind of gives you the impression that as long as you have all these people in house in the proper organization, you can go ahead and bump these things to grade 3. But that is not the intent. It's that word owner user that kind of changes the whole thing right there. You got to know what that means and be careful of that.
No, and I think I want to be careful when I say this, but I think, an example of this is where if one company has a facility that, they have a good history on, and then they open a similar style facility with running the same type of things, similar equipment, doing the exact same type of processes, they can apply that knowledge gained from the history of the facility A to facility B, right?
Sure, yeah.
Up to grade 2.
Right.
Right?
Up to grade 2,
Yeah.
Because they're not an owner user, so they'd be limited there.
No. Another thing that I found kind of interesting is documented risk analysis process instead of saying risk-based inspection program.
It's
right?
kind of like backwards.
Well, it's a little weird. Like, it's hinting that it's hinting that they have a documented RBI program, but
yeah, they're basically saying you should have an RBI program, and you should have the organization structure, and you should have all these people, and you're essentially doing that without having the program. And because you don't have it, or it's not approved, I should say, maybe you do have it, that's where you're still limited to that grade 2. But they do really want you to kind of use all those ideas of risk-based inspection.
Well, you can go up to a grade 3 because they have the cap, right? It's just they don't have the RBI. If you
have the cap, yes.
Yeah, they don't have the RBI, so they can't go beyond grade 3. So that's why I'm thinking they call it a risk analysis process.
Yeah, same idea though, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have risk analysis processes, you can turn that into an RBI. And
well, you're essentially there, right? You just kind of have to go through the audit process and maybe change a couple things. But
yeah. Okay. Do we need to beat that anymore? I think we kind of made that pretty clear.
I think so. On the topic of the known service stuff, should we maybe talk to some examples of that, maybe like sistering inspection, things like that? It'd be a good time to
sure
bring that in, how that works. What I think of right away with sister inspections is FinFan banks.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually a good one. Even shell and tube exchanges. I think in the first part to this, we talked about, I think it was with damage mechanisms or something or other, and we were talking about a 6 or 4 pack of exchangers. That's something quite typically you'll see too, where you're pulling out 4 bundles for cleaning, and you're only going to do iris and inspection on the shell on one of them, for example, and just sister the results to the other ones. Now, where you got to watch with things like that is if you start finding mechanisms, you can't sister bad results to something else. Now you're kind of opening a can of inspection worms, if you will, I guess. But that is kind of the whole point of it too, right?
Yeah, well, typically, you don't want to, but sometimes when you find something bad and then you go look at the one typically downstream, it normally isn't as bad, or you'll find something totally else or totally different normally. Yeah,
so for example, in the bundle example, say you pull the 4 bundles and then you go into one of the shells and you find some cracking. You can't apply that to your other 3 now. Now you got to go in and inspect those and see if you got the same thing happening there. Or, you don't find that and you have a good inspection and clean results. Now you can sister those satisfactory results to the other ones. So that kind of, I think, ties in nicely with the known service to some degree.
Yeah, I think the FinFan banks is probably the best one for everyone to relate to.
Sure, yeah.
Maybe if you got a bank of compressors, or I don't know if you can call them a bank, but a row of compressors, and you have those, first and second stage separators, right? Yeah. Ones that aren't seeing vibrating service, they're typically outside of the building, but if you're typically compressing, a gas stream or something like that, all those knockout pots and stuff like that, they're gonna typically see the same type of process, and and have the same type of damage mechanism. So that's something else to look for. But again, those are not in vibrating service, because that has a different.
That's a whole different thing too.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah, it's just another one of those things to be careful with too. You don't want to get too carried away with the known service and kind of take away all your inspections. That's not ideal either.
No, that'll come bite you in the butt.
Yeah, exactly. If you're if you got too much of that going on in a turnaround, and all of a sudden you doubled the inspection work scope, you're not too popular either. Not that it's only one person, but the whole group there is not going to be too popular if they're the ones dragging the thing out and becoming the critical path. So
yeah. Section 11.4 is inspection and pressure relief valve servicing date deferral and revision. I don't think we really.
Deferrals.
Yeah. It just, I have nothing highlighted in this section. On that Appendix A table, it does have some servicing intervals for PRVs. So check that out. I think we will be talking about PRVs just in a second here as well, though, or PRDs, depending on what you want to call them.
Well, I think on the deferral note, maybe like just a couple things. Like the deferral is almost like your RBI program. And what I mean by that is it's going to be a group of approvals. It's not going to, in some instances it will, but it's usually not going to be one person or just the inspector deferring something. It's going to require multiple signatures. So you're going to have probably operations involved there, process, and inspections as well, right? Deferrals are typically a one-time extension. It's not intended to be a permanent change to your interval. So it's not something that you can just apply to stretch out your interval without following the table. So if you're stuck to a grade 2 type of thing, you can't defer something and think that now you have an extra year all the time. That's not how that works. It's kind of a one-time fix or Band-Aid type of thing is really the idea with the deferrals.
Yeah, and actually 11.4.2 is it goes, owners who do not hold a cap must obtain ABSA acceptance for any proposed deferral that exceeds 10% of the inspection servicing interval or 6 months, whichever is less.
Right. And then I think for owner users, it's over 1 year.
Yeah.
You have to, and I don't necessarily know that it's an acceptance. That's what, well, it is, but you do have to submit it to them. I think it's more of they want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
Like this year or this past year was a good example of that. A lot of facilities had to go through a deferral process in the spring because of the pandemic and pushing everything off. So, ABSA, I think, was quite busy with those this last year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They were pushing stuff out quite a bit, and actually, I think, like we touched on it, ABSA did a pretty good job on providing guidance and kind of providing companies leeway to extend out their intervals, like not willy-nilly, but they did it reasonably.
Yeah. Well, with that kind of volume, I think you have to, right?
Yeah.
And I think just kind of on that point again too, like anytime you're making revisions or changes to your intervals, as per your table 1, just make sure you're documenting that stuff too. That's another auditable thing as well. So you just want to make sure when that revision was made, it was kind of documented. And, a lot of your IMS programs, this will all kind of be built in. So that's really easy to trace and to show somebody in an audit. But just make sure you are documenting that, who's approving that. Usually going to have your ISI type of person involved there or somebody from inspections providing some input and approval for that.
Make sure you update it on the ESR.
Yes, that thing again.
So the ESR does come up in the subsequent section here, 11.5. I don't think we really need to get into much more of it. There is one little section here, 11.5.3 is decommissioned equipment. It just lets you know that the AB-10 form or owner user's electronic summary report, ESR, are used to notify ABSA when there's a change in ownership or location or other status changes such as being removed from service, being sold, relocated to another address or site, or scrapped or permanently removed from service. So just make sure that if you have equipment that is being decommissioned, moved, or anything that I just mentioned, you have to do an AB10 or supply that to ABSA on your ESR.
Yeah, well, kind of both. Like that's a hand-in-hand thing, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times on turnarounds, you'll swap out equipment or decommission it for whatever reason. So there'll be an AB10 submitted right away for that, and then your ESR will also be updated, and that'll reflect that at the end of the year as well. You did say relocated, so I think that kind of goes back to the part one when we were talking about the upstream facilities or whatever it was that bounce their equipment all over the place.
Yeah.
So that's kind of I guess that's where you would update that. Probably more so on your ESR. I don't know if you have to submit an AB10 for those every time. Kind of an interesting one. On that note, I don't know where else this would come in.
I don't think it would hurt just to do an AB10 to save your butt and update your ESR. But
yeah, you could. If they don't want it, they're going to tell you not to bother with that.
Yeah.
On a kind of a similar topic, I don't think we talked about this in the first episode, but how about like temporary pressure equipment? So where I'm thinking here is like when you're doing your decon of your units and things like that, they bring in like the temp exchangers or drums or whatever it is, and then their sole purpose is to heat or cool the chemical or run it through the plant to decon it, and then that's it. Then they take it away. What kind of interval do you think they put on those things?
I can't remember off the top of my head, to be honest, but they definitely have to be inspected. And I have seen some of them with A numbers, but I think...
Yeah, they'll be registered and everything, well, provided they're the size and volume and pressure and all that meet the act. So let's take that out of the equation.
Well,
so let's assume
here,
they are
let me tell you this.
Registered
before
equipment.
each use. I'd say, you need to do an inspection on it before each use, especially if you're moving it around everywhere.
Yeah, and you should, especially if it's coming in from you don't even know where. But the experience I have with these things is ABSA will put a 1 year on them. So they'll essentially keep them at a grade 1 for their whole life. And they will issue a fresh inspection permit every year on them. So it's kind of they're one of those things that get overlooked a lot on turnarounds and that. Nobody really cares about them. They get brought in and they do their thing, and it's just there. It's just temp equipment, but it is still registered pressure equipment that falls under the same rules and regulation as everything else. So really, yeah, you should do an inspection to look at the condition of it, because you don't know where it came from or how it's been operating. But you should also make sure it does have an inspection permit within 1 year, because they kind of treat them almost like the public stuff. They'll give it a fresh permit every year, certificate of inspection permit. So that's something you should be looking for with that temp stuff before you let them commission it.
Yeah, and even as contract people or owner user inspectors, if a company is bringing that equipment on site, it's up to you. Especially for the owner user people, it's up to you to inspect that equipment coming onto your site to ensure that it does operate safely and meets any site requirements. I know during a turnaround, during on a pigging truck, they had some pressure vessels that they asked me to look at, and one didn't have a nameplate on it. And I told them they couldn't use it, and nobody was happy with me, right?
No. Well, that just means you're doing your job if nobody likes you.
But, according to the in-house documents of that company, you could not, and even just the regulatory documents, like it needs to have a nameplate on it. And they handicapped themselves by following their own documents, and then they brought on a contractor that had equipment with no nameplate, no inspection history on it, no identifying numbers on it. So I was like, well, you can't start decoke on this furnace, even though it's critical path kind of stuff. Like I got an earful the next day, but I just said, here, look at your own document. See you later.
Well, you're supposed to follow the rules, right? And it kind of makes sense when you think about that temp equipment, because yes, it has maybe not your example, but yes, it has a nameplate that tells you the design conditions of it, but what kind of process is that thing seeing? A variety of things, right? Because it goes all over the place, different sites, even different provinces, countries, maybe even for that matter. And it probably gets cleaned and taken care of. I'm sure it does, but it the worst thing you can do for your equipment is to shut it down and start it up. And that's all that happens to that temp equipment is it continually gets started up and shut down, has really volatile chemicals running through it. So it makes sense that it's on a 1 year interval because, it gets operated pretty hard. So
Yeah.
it really does make sense, right?
That's a good point to bring up, Scott. Really good.
Yeah, just one of those things to keep in mind when you're doing your PSSR walkdowns and whatnot. Make sure they got a fresh inspection permit with that thing. And I don't usually have too much trouble with this myself, especially if it's a good reputable company doing the deconning for you. They should have all those things well in advance. It shouldn't really be an issue. But the odd time we have ran into this where they don't have it, and it's because it wasn't inspected. So we had to get ABSA to come in and have a look because they're the only ones who can issue that little blue ticket. We can't do that for them, unfortunately.
That's right. Good to move on?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool.
I didn't know when to squeeze that temp equipment one in, but
no, it's
kind
good.
of had it in the back of my head that I want to throw this in here somewhere because it's kind of an interesting little nugget that I don't think enough people pay attention to.
That's why they pay you the big bucks and why you do this show for free.
Exactly.
So our next section is RBI. And
is that where we're at now?
Did we skip by that or did we go to...
I think so. It just went way off grid there with the decon stuff. Yeah, I think so because it was something to do with deferrals in the equipment file. And yeah. I think that's where we left off.
Well, there's not too much I have highlighted here for the RBI stuff because it takes a small team to do RBI properly, right? And you obviously, like we've beat to death already, you need to have RBI in your cap to actually execute it to exceed these grade intervals. So I don't know what else to say about it. It's a good method to streamline your inspection and inspection intervals and kind of extend them out, but that shouldn't be the point of it. It's more or less to focus your inspections on and identify exactly which damage mechanisms you have and where to find them. And once you can streamline it enough where you, not that it always happens, but can consistently kind of identify what's happening and where, keep inspecting until you narrow it down and keep getting as much information about the system as you can in the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's a efficiency tool is what it is, right?
Yeah.
And it just becomes more efficient the more data you pump into this thing. It all depends on your situation in your facility. Sometimes it's just not practical, but even if you are like, say you don't even have you're not an owner user, just an owner, but you do have like the organization structure to support an RBI team. Not to say it's not something you can't implement and just really validate your inspection plans, even though you are stuck on a grade 2. So it can be utilized that way. I think the point to really take from this is if you want to utilize it for the purpose of going beyond the table 1 intervals, beyond grade 3 to a grade 4, if you will, that's where you have to most definitely be an owner user, have a cap, and you have to have RBI listed on that cap to be able to utilize that.
Yeah, actually, I did find my RBI notes, and actually within AB-506 it goes, if not properly applied, the RBI process can focus attention away from items that are incorrectly assessed as having low risk, and this can result in hazardous situations, which is exactly what we're trying to explain here.
Yeah, really, if you're not applying it properly, you can actually, have the opposite effect where it's driving shorter intervals. That can happen too.
Yeah, and it just defeats the whole purpose of it. But it also states in here that, having an RBI program requires a formal management process, detailed development and planning, and involvement of experienced corrosion, materials, maintenance, and process engineers and technologists and operating personnel. So it's a dynamic process that requires the resources available to validate all that. And there is there's not a ton, but it's a methodical process to kind of figure it out and actually streamline it. That's all we want to kind of put across. I don't really want to talk anymore about this now because it's just getting out of hand.
Well, it's one of those things where you kind of have to just leave it alone or you got to talk about it for an hour or two.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a big team effort. Is a big thing to take away, and it has to be part of your CAP. Maybe some good reference documents on this point. Your APIs 580 and 581, and then there's also an ABSA document, which I believe I haven't read it for quite some time here, but it's 505, and I think it's more or less like a guide on setting up your RBI program. So it's the kind of things they're going to want to see and what they're going to want to audit. So just some more references, I guess, if you are curious to read some more. Maybe sometime down the road we'll do an RBI episode and really get into it. But that's probably enough for this episode, or we're going to be into part 3 or 4 or something here. So.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, it gets pretty detailed. Section 13 of 506 is fitness for service. Don't touch this if you don't know what the heck you're doing. Yeah. We're not going to touch this because we don't know what the heck we're doing, right? API 579 and ASME FFS 1 cover fitness for service assessments. Nice. And
I think they're a joint venture now, are they not? I think it's like slash.
Yeah, maybe
579 slash ASME. It's something like that. I think they kind of merged the two into one document now.
Possibly.
Yeah.
So this is like the next level from your API 510 or, pitting assessment and stuff like that. It's like what does the equipment actually need to limp through to the next service interval if you cannot fix it? Like absolutely cannot fix it. Like just because you don't want to fix it, you don't apply fitness for service to it. Like this is usually a last ditch effort to kind of keep it going until you can plan for a proper repair.
Yeah, and I think on that note, like the pitting assessment, you're kind of alluding to per 510 there. Another one of those documents that they like to reference, but don't give credit for. If you're doing a fitness for service based on that methodology, it doesn't require design survey approval. If you are doing anything that is, so let's say you're doing a fitness for service where the minimum design conditions of the original code of construction of the equipment can't be met, that type of fitness for service actually would have to get submitted to ABSA design survey and approved before you can go ahead and implement that. Now, that does happen, quite often, and it's going to be a team of engineers and all those people involved with that. So it is one of those things that happens, but just be aware of that. If you're doing anything too crazy there and you're going to be beyond your code of construction limits, you definitely need an ABSA approval for that.
Yeah, it can get pretty detailed, and sometimes it's almost back engineering it from like what you have existing to like what it can actually do, right? Yeah. Instead of like what you need it to do, and here's the design conditions. It's like, holy crap.
Yeah, it can be quite an interesting process actually, but it's one of those things. I think the first note on that you said was the best. If you don't know what you're doing with this, leave it alone. Don't implement it if you don't fully understand what it is or don't quite know what you're doing. But there's engineers that specialize in this and this alone. They really know it well.
Oh, and there's plenty of engineering firms that'll just vacuum your money up by doing fitness for service evaluations.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
Yeah. There's a lot of software and tools out there that can do a lot of this for you too. So it's, again, just if you don't understand it, don't know what you're doing, maybe leave it alone.
Okay, section 14. Feels like we're flying through this compared to the last episode.
I know. Well, we can always go back to definitions and just finish with that.
Need to drink even more. Okay, so section 14 is non-destructive examinations, or NDE.
Oh, nice.
I know you've been waiting to talk about this.
Well, not that I want to talk about it a whole lot, but there's an interesting takeaway here. And I don't know what I want to say about this. I'll say what's written here. I don't know what I think about this. So it's along the line of certification. So I think we all know by now, we've hammered this one home enough. So your NDE technician, let's say we're using a NDE company. You've got them in to do your wet fluorescent mag on all your weld seams or whatever it is you're doing in there. LPI, UT thickness, any of those type of things. So they're going to have a CGSB level 2, or they may have an S&T TC1A in-house program. You can have either one of those two things, for the most part, without going too much deeper into that. Now, if the ND technician is employed by the owner user or one of those inspection companies we talked about, And they have ND as part of the scope of their integrity assessment program, of course. They do not have to have a CGSB or an SNT certification at all if they're performing UT thickness, MT, or PT, provided they have some experience and kind of know what they're doing and they're deemed competent, whatever that means. So that one's kind of interesting. What do you think about that one, Frank? Do you agree with that? I don't know why that's even an option, but it is.
Does it matter if I agree with it or not? The ABSA says that they can do it. So, my personal opinion is they should at least have the qualifications to do it. To either SNT or CGSB would be, even better.
Yeah, I would say so.
It's up to them. It's their equipment, and if they want to get people to do that and take that risk, that's up to them. But they got to have the program, right?
Yeah, you've got to have ND as like scope of your quality manual, so you got to have something there. But and I think somewhere to draw the line with this too is this can only really be applied for integrity assessment type of ND. So you're doing your CML readings, you're doing your wet fluorescent mag internal. You can get away with it there. Let's say you got to cut in a flush patch or something like that, and you have whatever company repair contractor in there do this welding for you. You can't go and do the mag for them to certify the repair. It's not meant for that. So that's where you would have to have like your third party company, ND company with their ND qualifications. So you just got to be careful what you're doing here. If you're really trying to abuse this one, just, be careful where the boundaries are there. It's really meant for that like initial inspection type of stuff, not for anything you want.
I think they probably could elaborate on like what the appropriate documented training and experience would be. Because essentially that would be going to do like a CGSB like course or something like that. Not that a CGSB course, but like the same courses you would go do to get your CGSB or S&T certification.
Yeah, well, or if you're, a fresh inspector that doesn't really have any certs yet and you've hammered numbers into our RBI program for 2 years, does that say make you competent to go in and do some wet fluorescent mag? I would say not. Like,
no, definitely not.
But maybe in someone else's eyes it does. So I don't know. I don't really like that little out, but it is there, and people do take advantage of it.
Yeah, well, it's for integrity assessment organization, so I don't know.
Yeah, or the owner user, right? So, I mean, the owner user or your contract owner user, if you will, right?
Maybe if we ever get the gall or maybe rope someone from ABSA and we can ask them like what the heck that statement means.
Yeah. Might be the next revision. Take it away. Well, I mean, when you think about it, it is, it's the owner user's equipment, and it's their inspection plan they set up, and they're satisfying that that's going to, the person may not be qualified, but they should be experienced or knowledgeable enough. So if that's satisfying their program, so be it. I don't think this happens a lot, but it does. I've seen it a little bit here and there, but I think for the most part, you're going to have your ND companies on site for your turnarounds and that no reason you can't have them in there to do it.
So even though you just defined it like that, does that give you any more warm and tingly feelings about that statement?
No, I still don't like it. Well, and then even the documentation too, like, would you rather have a UT report with all the thickness readings and a nice little detail of what they did, or an email from your cross shift saying, yeah, I did all the doinks, here's the readings. Oh, thanks. I mean, what makes for a better equipment file for better history building, right? It's nice to have that report to throw in there, and then anybody can review that.
I wholeheartedly agree. Okay. Anything else on the NDE side of it?
That's all I had for that one. That was the only thing that...
No, that was good.
It just bothers me. It's a weird thing that's in there, and I just might as well talk about that.
I like it. All right. Section 15, pressure relief devices, PRDs is how they define them. So along with your pressure equipment, owners and owner users are required to service their pressure relief devices to make sure that they're in tip-top shape and working as intended, right? The owner must ensure that PRDs and the instrumentation and controls that are necessary to ensure safe operation of the pressure equipment are periodically examined, tested, and maintained by competent persons in accordance with the documented work processes.
Yeah, so that would kind of be like your maintenance group and a little bit removed from the inspection. So I wouldn't say don't blur the lines too much with that and your inspection intervals as per the table 1. Kind of two different things, but kind of the same thing as well, right? So usually most sites will have like a guy that's like the RV focal, and he kind of takes care of that stuff. And they may even have people that walk them down on that. But then there'll also be like the inspectors doing their inspections, right? And then there'll be the servicing intervals and all that stuff too. So,
and by RV, you mean relief valve.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Just winging those terms out there loosely.
That one's a very company-specific term, yeah. I think one of the biggest things under here is isolation valves. And this one,
Yes.
It gets missed a lot by newer inspectors, right? A lot of seasoned guys catch on to it pretty quick. But on the inlet side or the outlet side of any pressure relief devices, these isolation valves would typically be there for maintenance purposes, right? Either on the run or during turnaround. And they're there to make sure there's positive isolation so you can remove the device without, being exposed to any process conditions or any pent up energy that may be in there. You typically have bleeds on them and stuff like that. So you will bleed out the pressure or whatever else is in there before you remove the valve, obviously. But something to notice here is like the owner must have an auditable management system that establishes procedures and training requirements for the control of such valves. This management system must be available for review by ABSA at all sites where block valves are installed in the pressure relief path. Right?
Yeah, so that's a good one. Like, and kind of what they're getting at is like having them locked open and things like that. So a lot of times what you'll see, which is really common at places, is they'll have the block valves car sealed open before it goes into service. And they'll quite often have a kind of a visual tagging system, right? And there'll be almost like a Plinko board type of thing in the control room, and they'll have like a red for closed or white for open, something to that effect. And that's kind of their visual double check, if you will. So they'll go and car seal the valve. Then they'll come back and flip the tag, and that's kind of the program that they'll have in place. So that's a quite popular one. And that's something you have to have some sort of system verifying that those valves are open. There's manually operated valves too, pneumatic valves, control valves, things like that. Not quite as common at a PSV, I would say. It's usually like a gate valve type of thing. But yeah, that's something you'll see, just a program in place verifying that it is car sealed open. And that's something ABSA will audit. I've been involved in that once before at a new facility, and that was one of the things they wanted to audit. They actually checked the tagging board, made notes on a few, and went out and did verify that they were car sealed or weren't. So that's something they will look at, and it is important too, right? Because if you have a block valve in front of an RV, that's fine if it's open, PRD, sorry, but if it's closed, what's the point of your pressure relief? It's never going to be able to relieve.
Yeah, it just renders it inoperable, right? So the next thing that I think we should touch on is the maintenance of pressure relief valves. So it has an excerpt here from the PESR, which is the Pressure Equipment Safety Regulation, Section 39. Adjustable parts of a pressure relief valve must be sealed at the time of servicing and remain sealed during operation. Seals must be installed in a manner that prevents changing the adjustment of a pressure relief device without breaking the seal. So typically on PSVs or PRDs, you'll see these little lead seals with a wire going through a little loop either on the cap or somewhere else where the adjustable spring is to set the pressure. And this is typically done because sometimes, there could be a valve chattering or something like that, and someone who has less experience with these devices might just screw that cap off, tighten it down a bit to prevent it from chattering, right? Well, you've actually just change the set pressure of that device, and it may not relieve at the intended pressure, right? And you could overpressure your equipment or your piping system, or even affect any other equipment that's in the, rotating equipment or something, and totally blow it up or destroy it. So that's what that's there for. So be cognizant of when you're actually inspecting these things that these little seals are on there and they haven't been tampered with. And unfortunately, some of them get damaged in transport. It has to go back and get pop tested, to make sure nothing's been changed. And the servicing company has to verify that, reseal it, and send it back to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to look at when you're walking down a PSV when it comes back or when it gets installed again. You're going to have, you should have a fresh service tag on there. So when it was popped, the date's a pretty important thing to have on there. There's nameplates on them as well, similar to a pressure vessel. If they do repairs to them, a lot of times they'll stamp out some of that data and change it, similar to like if you re-rated a pressure vessel. They sometimes even put repair nameplates on there. The little lead seal, like Frank mentioned, sometimes they have like those tip tail devices on there so they can tell if they've been knocked over or not. That's not something that stays on there. That's more of a transport thing that gets removed at some point. But a lot of things to look at for PSVs. Code stamping is another kind of critical thing, specifically when we get into boilers. One thing I did want to mention on the block valves before we moved on there, one area where you should never see a block valve is a relief for any kind of Section 1, so it's any steam piping or power boiler. There should not even be a block valve, shouldn't exist. That should be free-flowing right to the relief, and there should be no way to impede that. There's no need for a block valve program, if you will, because it shouldn't be there. There's some older facilities where that's kind of been adopted in, like really old facilities, but you don't see that too much anymore, and you really shouldn't.
No, and that's even in code, right?
Yeah.
So, like Scott said, there's a lot of stuff. Maybe one other thing to check for. Well, there's a lot of things to check for, and there is a decent list here. It does list off some stuff, but internal bellows, like PSVs or PRDs with internal bellows, they need to be vented, and they'll have like an actual open hole on the body on the bellow side. Now, sometimes some process vapors may leak it out of this, and it is also a code requirement to have these things venting to a safe location. You can't just have it open to atmosphere, because they're normally at face height and or liquid.
They are always, yes.
Right? So they do have to have at least a nipple with an elbow on it pointing that to into at least down to the ground or to a safe location. And usually if it's like sour or very hazardous material, they're going to run tubing down to an oily water sewer or even to another system to collect that kind of vapor or liquids that may come up. But you also have to be able to watch those, because you don't really want liquid or anything should be internally sealed, right? And you don't really want stuff leaking out of there. But that's what those vents are there for.
Yeah, a lot of time there's shipping caps in there too. Got to take those out. There's always
shipping caps,
It's, that's why it's important to have like the PSV data report or something, so you kind of know what the internals are, because a lot of times it's really hard to tell without having that data sheet and knowing what the design of that thing is. It's really hard to tell just by looking at it.
It is. Another way to do that is, if you can find the manufacturer's name, you can look at the model number.
Model number, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, it takes a bit of time to go through it, but you can discern what type of internals are inside of it just based on the model number. So I know when I was doing was it kind of like an embedded inspector position, I had all the manufacturer catalogs for them, and it would just check every period, like every once in a while. Okay, this one does have a bellows or something inside. Let's go, when I go do the inspection, make sure that it does have the vent, or does it, maybe there's no bellows in here, so it's going to be a sealed body. And you will see that that screw cap in there actually sealed, right, as well.
Exactly, because that's like in some instances, you mentioned somebody tightening that up, but you can have the opposite of that too, where somebody pulls the plug out. Yeah, we got all the plugs out. Well, thanks. We weren't supposed to do that.
And now it's just open. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's kind of two opposite purposes there that you really need to understand what's going on with those.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe something else to note is that your PSVs or PRDs have to be serviced by a servicing company that has a cap for servicing pressure relief devices.
Need a cap to do anything in this province. Jeez.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a good point though. Make sure of that if you're sending out a large quantity, and there's kind of the few big reputable companies that do this all, but if you're sending out to somebody new, just make sure they're appropriately qualified for that. If you got steam service or section 1 PSVs, that's a different line item on the cap too. Make sure they have that. Just make sure you're aware of what they're doing and that they're qualified for it.
That's right. And maybe just to touch base on something here, it says the term pressure relief valve or PRV applies to safety valves, safety relief valves, and relief valves. Cut that out. Right. And like Scott just said, the people who are servicing these do have to be competent for the scope of work, and it's the owner's responsibility to ensure that the organization servicing the PRVs are competent to do the work.
What else with the relieving? Like, you want to touch on rupture disc quickly, maybe, or do you got more on the?
Aside from ensuring that you keep these records, and if you maybe something for progressing the intervals on them, the servicing intervals, which you can do with the Appendix A table, is if you get clean, consistent pops with your pressure relief devices, and they're within like 10% of their set pressures there. Mm-hmm. You can start increasing their interval as per the table, or for RBI if you got the program.
Yep.
If they're not popping, or they're popping too soon or popping too late, or they're extremely fouled or something like that, you're going to want to take a step back and possibly look at decreasing the servicing interval and have it done more periodically to ensure that it can actually still perform the function that it needs to, if it ever needs to. But yeah, ruptured disc would be probably the next logical step.
Yeah, I guess. And I don't know if there's much more to say about those, but same thing as the, any PRD really, right? It's going to be on interval as well. It's going to have a nice little nameplate, name tag type of thing on it too. So a lot of things to inspect there. Usually come with like a kind of a manufacturer date type of thing when they're on there. Not like it has a pop test or anything done like that, because it is a destructive relief, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's one time, yeah.
Yeah, you can't really test it, but
batch tested, right?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
So under section 15.5, the device must be inspected at the assembly stage to verify that it's been installed correctly and that the disc meets the requirements as defined in section 8 div 1. So yeah. Section 8 div 1 talks about some stuff like Scott said. It's got to have the right stamping on it. There is some tolerances up to certain pressure intervals. I think it's like a couple PSI up to 40 PSI is the tolerance, and then anything over that, it's like 10% or something. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Something like that, yeah.
They're also, what you're going to want to look for is there's got to be a vent in between the rupture disc and the actual pressure relief device. Mm-hmm. And most of them have like a holder, right? And you want to make sure that's installed correctly, right? And there's gaskets on each side of that holder on the flange connections, because, minor things, but that's stuff you want to look at. And you do want to watch it being assembled, like it says in here. Like they're going to take the rupture disc out of the box. They're going to put it in the holder assembly. You want to make sure it's facing the right way, because there is a couple different types. There's concave and convex ones and flat ones. And
yeah, it's almost like a Jiffy Pop thing that's ready to explode, right? So
yeah,
and it's kind of a fragile device too. So yeah, you definitely want to watch it get installed, because if that thing gets damaged and they just shove it in there and don't tell you, you're going to be going, essentially unprotected until the next interval, and you wouldn't even know.
Yeah. So, okay, I think that's it for that. The next section is section 16, which is repair and alterations, which is Probably one episode of definitions again, and then and then probably another 40 minutes of us blabbering on about other stuff. But I think that would actually be a good episode to do. And that's all I think we should say is that your repairs and alterations of in-service pressure equipment are going to be covered under AB-513 document. And it's actually a pretty good document.
Yeah, the 513, and all your repairs are per your original code of construction for the most part when you can. But yeah, that's too big of a section to try to tackle the jam in here. I think maybe we still haven't done our pressure vessel life cycle one yet, so maybe that'll be like a episode or two of that series. So yeah, at some point we'll we'll take this one on. But if you're interested for now, AB 513's pretty good. Good place to start anyways, and it'll direct you to other documents. So I think that's about it. That wraps the sections. We got the appendixes. Maybe we'll run through them quickly, just talk about what they are. There's not a lot to really say about each one, but we've been talking about this table 1 quite a bit. That's Appendix A. That's where you find that.
Yeah, Appendix A. Appendix B is a specific service for upstream vessels, and it's got another little table there for vessels within those specific services, I think with some other intervals there. Appendix C is your...
you're talking about Table 2?
Is it Table 2?
Yeah, I think that's like the propane bullets or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one is its own thing as well, too. Kind of another unique situation, but... Table 1's where you'll find most of your stuff, right? And like we were talking to before, like the grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, it gives you your different intervals.
Yep. Appendix C is your certificate of authorization permit flow chart. Kind of shows you what you can and cannot do, or when you need one, or when you need an organization that needs one, right?
Owner user programs for the propane vessels.
Oh yeah,
we're
jumping back to B.
Sorry, we're all over the map here.
It's pretty late. Holy cow!
I know, right? The cap flow chart you're talking about too.
It doesn't matter at this point. And then Appendix D is just a PSV servicing guide, her PRD servicing guide. So
yeah, so just some good. Appendix A is basically the meat and potatoes of this document. That's a table that's going to give you your intervals, but B, C, and D, just kind of some good references, I would say. C is nice, the cap flow chart. We've been talking about caps a lot in this episode. That gives you a nice flow chart. If we didn't do a good enough job explaining it, you can just follow through that. It'll tell you when you need one, when you don't. PSV servicing guide, again, some good info. I don't know what else to say about that. Yeah, table 1, get familiar with that one. Table 2 if you have propane storage. And are an owner user.
It's late. We're tired. Don't get stuck on definitions. Scott, I'll see you next episode.
See you next time.